My father tapped his champagne glass. A cruel smirk played on his lips as he pointed at my loose navy dress. He told the groom's wealthy family I was his lazy fat daughter, who probably only showed up to drain the buffet. The room erupted into laughter at my expense, but the amusement died instantly when the groomsman stepped forward. His spine straight as an arrow, he brought his hand to his brow in a crisp salute. "Sir," he said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence, "she is our commanding officer." My father froze his champagne glass, hovering mid-air. "My name is Rebecca, 34 years old, and I spent my life as the punchline to my family's cruel jokes." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to hide your strength from toxic people who wanted to tear you down. The rehearsal dinner was at the city's most exclusive country club. My sister Natalie, the undisputed golden child, was marrying Derek Washington. Derek was a brilliant orthopedic surgeon. He came from a respected African-American family with generations of military service. He was a good man, but he had no idea what kind of snake pit he was marrying into. My father, Richard, was a failing contractor, desperate to keep up appearances. He was paying for this wedding with money he claimed he barely had, always complaining about his sacrifices. The Washington family sat with quiet dignity, while my family was aggressively performative. I sat near the back wearing a baggy navy dress. My family believed I wore it because I let myself go. They were convinced I was unemployed, drowning in debt, and living off their scraps. They did not know the loose fabric deliberately hid the severe shrapnel scars I sustained during my last combat deployment. I was a major in the United States Army. To them, I was just the embarrassing scapegoat used to make Natalie look superior. Dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. My mother, Patricia, loudly sighed whenever I took a bite of food. She kept offering me plain salad instead of steak. Natalie practically vibrated with smugness, flaunting her massive diamond ring and talking over Derek's mother constantly. When the time came for toasts, my father stood up. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, grabbed the microphone, and began. He spent 10 agonizing minutes praising Natalie, calling her his perfect angel and greatest pride. Then he turned his gaze toward my dark corner. A vicious glint flashed in his eyes. He pointed his glass right at me. "And then we have Rebecca," he announced, his voice booming over the sound system. He chuckled, looking directly toward Derek's elegant parents. "Please excuse her outfit. She is my lazy fat daughter. We are glad she managed to roll out of bed today. Honestly, I think she only showed up tonight to drain the buffet and sneak rolls into her purse." The Washington family looked incredibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. But my family roared with laughter. Natalie threw her head back, cackling loudly. My mother wiped a fake tear of mirth. The wealthy guests chuckled politely, assuming it was a harmless joke. I just sat there, my face burning under the warm lights. For over 3 decades, I had taken this abuse silently. I was trained to endure hostile interrogation and survive under fire, but the casual cruelty of my own blood always stung. I looked down, preparing to excuse myself and walk out. But before I could push my chair back, another chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. It was Jason Carter, Derek's groomsman. Jason was a young, sharp lieutenant who worked directly under my command at the base. He had been quiet all night, observing my family's toxic dynamic. Now he stood up. He did not say a word at first. He marched past the head table, ignoring the confused stares of the wedding party. He stopped directly in front of my chair. He snapped to attention, bringing his polished shoes together with a sharp crack. He raised his right hand in a flawless, rigid salute. Sir Jason's voice cut through the room like a steel blade. He stared dead at my father. "You are speaking to a decorated major of the United States Army. She is our commanding officer." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. My father's mouth fell open, his face completely draining of color. The smug smile melted off Natalie's face instantly. Derek's father, a retired military veteran himself, suddenly sat up very straight, his eyes locked on me with profound respect. For a brief second, nobody breathed. The commanding authority in Jason's voice had completely shattered the carefully constructed narrative my father had built. Derek's father slowly lowered his napkin, his posture rigid with the deep ingrained respect that only another veteran truly understands. He looked at my father, then back at me, the confusion in his eyes rapidly morphing into quiet realization. But rationality was never my family's strong suit. A sharp scrape of a chair shattered the frozen tableau. Natalie shoved herself up from the table, her face twisted in an ugly mask of pure rage. For 28 years, she had been the center of the universe. Every birthday, every holiday, every casual Tuesday was designed to orbit around her ego. The idea that her unemployed, overweight scapegoat of a sister commanded an ounce of respect, let alone outranked a handsome groomsman at her own wedding, was a psychological impossibility for her. She snatched a full glass of dark red Cabernet from the center of the table. Her heels clicked frantically across the dining room floor as she stormed toward me. Derek stood up, his hand reaching out to stop her, but he was too late. Natalie did not even hesitate. With a violent flick of her wrist, she hurled the contents of the glass directly at my chest. The cold wine soaked instantly through the thin fabric of my navy dress. It dripped down my collar, staining the white silk lining of my cardigan. The collective gasp from the Washington family was audible. Derek's mother covered her mouth in sheer horror. "Are you out of your mind?" Natalie shrieked, her voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "Did you really think you could pull this off? How much did you pay him?" She pointed a trembling manicured finger at Jason, who had instantly shifted his stance, stepping between us like a shield. His jaw was clenched so tight, a muscle ticked near his ear. He was a breath away from treating my sister like a hostile threat. I stepped out from behind him, waving him down with a subtle gesture of my hand. "Stand down, Lieutenant," I said quietly. He immediately stepped back, his eyes locked on Natalie with absolute disgust. "See?" Natalie screamed, spinning around to face Derek's completely bewildered family. "She is delusional. She is a jobless, pathetic loser who hired an actor to ruin my wedding weekend. She could not stand that I am marrying a doctor while she lives in a basement." Derek finally pushed past the chairs, his face pale. "Natalie, stop it right now. What is wrong with you?" Before he could reach us, my mother lunged forward. Patricia had spent her entire adult life covering up the cracks in our family's facade, usually by throwing me under the bus. She grabbed my arm, her long acrylic nails digging painfully into my bicep. She yanked me hard, trying to pull me toward the service exit. "You have always been jealous of her, because you are a jobless spinster," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. Intended only for my ears, but entirely audible in the dead quiet room. "You could not let her have one single night. Could you? Get out. Get out right now before Derek's family cancels the wedding and ruins everything." I looked down at the hand clamped around my arm. My mother's knuckles were white. Her eyes were completely devoid of maternal affection, filled only with a desperate feral need to protect her golden child's perfect image. She did not care that I was dripping with wine. She did not care that a military officer had just confirmed my rank and honor. All she cared about was maintaining the lie. For my entire childhood, her grip on my arm had meant absolute submission. It meant I was supposed to shrink, apologize, and accept whatever punishment was deemed necessary to keep the peace. I had always folded. I had always made myself small so they could feel big. I looked past my mother and met my father's eyes. He was standing near the head table, still holding his empty champagne glass. He did not look angry. He looked terrified. The cogs in his brain were turning desperately, trying to calculate how to spin this disaster. He had lied to his wealthy future in-laws to make himself look like a martyr supporting a deadbeat daughter. Now that lie was cracking wide open. I slowly turned my attention back to my mother. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I simply looked at her hand, digging into my arm, and then looked directly into her eyes. The terrified little girl she expected to see was long gone, buried somewhere in the desert sand of a foreign country years ago. "Let go of me," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried the absolute unshakable weight of command. My mother gasped, her hand recoiling as if she had touched a hot stove. She stumbled back a step, bumping into a waiter who had frozen in the aisle. I looked at the dark red stains spreading across my chest. The wine was cold, but my blood was running hot. Still, years of military discipline kept my heart rate steady. I did not scream. I did not throw a tantrum. I simply reached up and began unbuttoning my ruined cardigan. My mother gasped again, likely assuming I was about to cause a scene and strip right there in the country club dining room. But I just slid the soaked fabric off my shoulders and let it drop heavily to the floor. Underneath, I wore a simple sleeveless silk shell. For the first time in years, I stood before my family without layers of baggy clothing hiding my physique. Without the thick wool covering me, the truth was laid bare. My arms were not thick with fat. They were heavily muscled, sculpted by years of rigorous physical training and carrying heavy gear through unforgiving terrain. But far more jarring than the muscle were the scars. Jagged, pale lines of raised tissue stretched across my left bicep and wrapped viciously over my shoulder. They were the permanent souvenirs of an improvised explosive device that had detonated near my convoy outside of Kabul. The gasps this time did not just come from my mother. The entire Washington family was staring. Derek's mother, Colonel Diane Washington, brought a hand to her chest, her eyes widening in immediate recognition of blast trauma. Derek himself looked absolutely sick to his stomach, his eyes locked on the undeniable proof of combat survival that my family had conveniently ignored or hidden away. Natalie stood frozen in place, the empty wine glass dangling from her fingers. For once in her life, she had absolutely nothing to say. Her petty little tantrum looked entirely pathetic next to the physical evidence of actual war. I turned my attention to the waiter my mother had backed into. He was staring at me with wide eyes, completely paralyzed by the unfolding drama. I opened my small clutch, pulled out my sleek, heavy Centurion Black American Express card, and held it out to him. "Please charge my meal to this," I said, my voice steady and perfectly polite. "And please add a 50% tip for the extreme inconvenience my sister just caused your waitstaff." The waiter took the card with shaking hands. From the corner of my eye, I saw my father make a choked noise at the back of his throat. He was a failing contractor who obsessed over wealth. He knew exactly what a black card meant and the immense financial requirements needed to hold one. You do not get one by being an unemployed burden living in a basement. I turned back to the room. I looked at Derek, who was standing perfectly still, his face pale and tight with embarrassment. "I am sorry for the disruption, Derek," I said evenly. "Enjoy your rehearsal dinner." I did not look at my parents. I did not look at Natalie. I gave Jason a brief nod, which he returned with a stiff, highly respectful tilt of his head. Then I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room. My posture was flawless. I did not rush. I walked with the measured, confident stride of a commanding officer leaving a briefing. The cool night air of the parking lot hit my face, providing a welcome relief from the stifling toxicity inside the club. I unlocked my car, tossing the ruined cardigan into the passenger seat. I was just reaching for the door handle to leave when I heard heavy footsteps jogging quickly across the asphalt. "Rebecca, wait. Please wait." I turned to see Derek hurrying toward me. The ambient light from the street lamps caught the deep distress on his face. He stopped a few feet away, breathing slightly heavy, running a nervous hand over his short haircut. "Look, I am so incredibly sorry." Derek started, his voice thick with genuine shame. "I had no idea Natalie would do something like that. I do not even know what to say. The way your family spoke to you, the way they treated you in there, it is completely unacceptable." I leaned against the door of my car, looking at this man who was about to marry my nightmare of a sister. "You do not have to apologize for her actions, Derek. You did not throw the wine." He shook his head, looking completely lost. "But I do not understand any of this. That groomsman, Jason, he saluted you. He called you a major, and those scars on your arm." Derek took a step closer, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. He looked like a highly educated man trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing or completely fabricated. Your dad told me you were completely unemployed. Derek said his words, spilling out rapidly as his confusion boiled over. He sat in my living room last month and told my parents that you were struggling with severe depression, living in a dark basement, and absolutely drowning in student loans. He said he was paying for this entire lavish wedding while still trying to bail you out of massive financial debt. My hand froze on the car door handle. The night air suddenly felt freezing against my skin. I looked sharply at Derek. What did you just say? Derek blinked clearly, taken aback by the sudden sharp drop in my tone. He said you were drowning in student loans. He said he had to take out a massive second mortgage on his properties to cover your college debts because you kept defaulting on the payments. I stared at him in the dimly lit parking lot. The puzzle pieces in my own mind were rapidly rearranging themselves into a horrifying criminal picture. Student loans. I went to college on a full military scholarship. I had never taken out a single student loan in my entire life, and my father knew that perfectly well. I looked at Derek, watching the deep confusion contort his face. He was an incredibly smart surgeon, but he was painfully naive to the depths of my father's manipulation. The pieces were falling into place rapidly, and I needed to get rid of Derek before my rising anger compromised my ability to think clearly. Derek, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, I need you to go back inside. Do not say a word about this conversation to Natalie or my father. Just go back to your parents and act normal. I am going to figure out exactly what is going on. He hesitated, clearly wanting to ask 100 more questions. He looked toward the heavy oak doors of the club, then back at me, his jaw tightening with anxiety. But the sheer command in my tone left no room for argument. He gave a slow, uncertain nod and turned back toward the building. I slid into the driver's seat of my sedan and slammed the door shut. The heavy thud of the locks engaging felt like the closing of a vault. The cold air inside the car did nothing to cool the burning heat in my chest. Student loans. The phrase echoed in my mind like a sick joke. I had earned a 100% full-ride ROTC military scholarship. I paid for my education with early morning drills, grueling physical training, and a binding commitment to serve my country in active combat zones. I had literally bled for my degree. I had never taken out a single student loan in my entire life. My father knew that perfectly well. He had even bragged about not having to pay for my college when I was 18. So why was he telling the wealthy Washington family that he was bailing me out of massive financial debt? My father was a narcissist and a liar. He loved to exaggerate his wealth and belittle my accomplishments. But telling Derek and his parents that I was drowning in loans was not just a casual insult meant to demean me. It was a highly calculated play. My father's contracting business had been bleeding money for years. He constantly complained about cash flow and delayed payrolls, yet he was somehow paying for a lavish country club rehearsal dinner and a wedding that easily cost upwards of $150,000. He was using my supposed financial ruin to extract pity money from Derek's family. But even that did not explain where the actual cash for this extravagant weekend was coming from. If he was lying to Derek about my debt, what else was he lying about? I pulled my phone from my clutch. My fingers moved automatically, dialing the 24-hour fraud and security hotline for my military credit union. As an active-duty military officer, my financial security was directly tied to my high-level security clearance. Any unexplained debt or delinquent accounts could immediately red flag my career and strip me of my rank. An automated system picked up, followed quickly by a live representative. "Thank you for calling Military Member Services," the man said. "How can I assist you tonight, Major Lawson? I need to run an immediate comprehensive credit pull on my Social Security number." I told him, turning on my engine just to get the heater going. "I suspect unauthorized financial activity on my profile." The representative's tone shifted instantly to high alert. "Understood, ma'am. I am pulling up your federal file right now. For verification, can you confirm your current duty station and your last deployment location?" I gave him the information, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I stared out the windshield at the glowing lights of the country club, watching the valet park another luxury car. "All right, Major," the representative said, his keyboard clicking rapidly in the background. "I have your file open from all three major bureaus. Are you currently reviewing a specific account you believe is fraudulent? I need you to look for any student loans," I instructed him, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Or any major lines of credit opened in the last 2 years that do not match my primary military banking history." The clicking paused. A long, incredibly heavy silence stretched over the secure line. Major Lawson, the representative, said, his voice tightening with professional concern. "You do not have any student loans on file, but I am looking at a massive secondary mortgage attached to your primary residence." I stopped breathing. "Excuse me, my house is fully paid off. I bought it with cash after my second tour." "Not according to this, ma'am," he replied grimly. "There is a second mortgage taken out 18 months ago for $160,000. And there is an active auto loan for a luxury vehicle, a Porsche, opened just 6 months ago. Both are listed under your name and your social security number." My stomach completely dropped out. 18 months ago, I was deployed overseas. I had left a limited power of attorney with my father strictly so he could manage the property taxes and basic maintenance on my home while I was in a combat zone. He had sworn he would just pay the utility bills and keep the lawn mowed. Instead, he had used my military absence to forge my signature and drain the equity right out of my home. He had stolen my identity to buy my sister a Porsche and fund her extravagant wedding. "Lock it down," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "Freeze every single account attached to my name right now." The sun barely crested the horizon when my phone shattered the silence of my bare apartment. I had not slept a single minute. I spent the entire night compiling federal statutes, banking regulations, and the exact penalties for wire fraud and identity theft. My dining table was covered in printed regulations. When the caller ID flashed with my father's name, I did not feel a spike of anxiety. I felt the cold, familiar hyper-focus of a soldier entering a combat zone. I pressed accept and put him on speakerphone. I expected him to start with damage control regarding the rehearsal dinner. I expected him to yell about Jason saluting me or the scene with the wine. Instead, my father sounded brisk, annoyed, and completely detached from the reality of what happened the night before. "Listen, Rebecca," he barked, skipping any form of greeting. "We need to move past whatever little stunt you pulled with that actor friend of yours last night. I do not have time for your theatrics today. I have a major deadline at noon, and I need you to check your email right now." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the stack of evidence proving he had stolen $160,000 from me. "What did you send me, Richard? Do not use that tone with me," he snapped. "I sent over an endorsement form. My firm is in the final selection round for a $15 million Department of Defense contracting bid at Fort Bradley. The federal government gives massive priority points to businesses partnered with or endorsed by active-duty military officers. I need you to digitally sign the affidavit stating you are a silent partner in my firm. It guarantees I win the bid." I stared at the phone. The sheer audacity was staggering. Not only had he drained the equity from my home to fund a fake lifestyle, but now he wanted to use my rank to defraud the federal government on a multi-million-dollar military contract. "I am not signing a federal affidavit committing contracting fraud for a company I have absolutely zero involvement with," I replied, my voice deadpan. A heavy, angry sigh crackled through the speaker. "You ungrateful brat! I clothe you, I feed you, I pay off your massive student loans so you do not end up on the street, and this is the thanks I get. It is just a piece of paper. You sign it. I get the 15 million, and maybe I will toss a few thousand your way to help you buy some clothes that actually fit." The manipulation was so deeply ingrained in his psyche, he genuinely believed his own lies. He thought if he repeated the lie about my student loans enough, it would somehow become the truth. "I am a major in the United States Army," I said slowly, making sure every syllable landed clearly. "Signing a fraudulent Department of Defense vendor application is a federal felony. I will not do it. Do not ask me again." The line went dead silent for 3 long seconds. When my father spoke again, the brisk annoyance was gone. It was replaced by a low, venomous tone that used to terrify me when I was a child. "You listen to me very carefully, Rebecca," he hissed. "You are going to open that email and sign that document. If you do not, I am going to make a phone call to the base commander at Fort Bradley. I happen to know General Davies plays golf at my club." I did not interrupt him. I let him dig his own grave. "I will call the general." Richard continued, his voice dripping with malice. "And I will tell him that my daughter returned from her deployment completely broken. I will tell him you are suffering from severe PTSD, that you are having violent psychotic breaks, and that you are fundamentally unstable. I will tell him about your little delusion last night at the country club, claiming you are some high-ranking officer and hiring men in suits to salute you. How long do you think you will keep your little army job once I report you as a psychological threat to yourself and others?" He was threatening to destroy my entire military career. In the armed forces, an official report of a severe psychotic break from a direct family member triggers an automatic psychological evaluation. It would mean immediate suspension of my security clearance. It would mean being benched, scrutinized, and treated like a liability until a medical board cleared me. He knew exactly how to weaponize my service against me. He waited for me to cry. He waited for me to hyperventilate and beg him not to ruin the only thing I had ever built for myself. But I was not the scared little girl he raised. "If you make that call, you will be making a false report to a federal installation," I warned him, keeping my voice perfectly even. "Sign the paper, Rebecca," he ordered. "You have 1 hour. If I do not get the notification that the affidavit is complete by 9 o'clock, your career is over. I will make sure they discharge you with nothing." He hung up the phone. The sharp click echoed in my quiet kitchen. I looked down at the pile of banking documents outlining his forgery. Now he had added extortion and attempted federal contracting fraud to his list of crimes. My father thought he was playing a game of chess against a pawn. He did not realize I had already flipped the board. I opened my laptop, navigating to the encrypted military network. I did not sign his fraudulent affidavit. Instead, I began preparing for the exact moment I would drop the hammer. 2 days later, I pulled into the sweeping circular driveway of my parents' suburban estate. The front lawn was overflowing with luxury cars for Natalie's bridal shower. I had zero desire to celebrate the sister who threw wine in my face, but attending this shower was a tactical necessity. My father's home office was on the first floor just past the kitchen. I needed physical access to his files to find the forged documents before federal investigators moved in. I walked through the heavy oak doors into a sea of pastel floral arrangements and clinking crystal. Before I could take off my coat, Natalie materialized. She wore a pristine white silk jumpsuit, looking every bit the blushing bride until she locked eyes with me. Her smile vanished, replaced by a cruel sneer. She did not say hello. She grabbed a silver tray holding 6 flutes of champagne from a passing caterer and shoved it directly into my hands. "Since you are living off our father's charity, you can at least make yourself useful," Natalie hissed under her breath. "Walk around and serve these, and stay in the background. Derek's mother is arriving soon, and I do not want your depressing energy ruining my photos." I looked down at the silver tray in my hands. A younger version of me would have cried. A less disciplined woman would have thrown the tray at the wall. But I was a military strategist. I knew the value of playing the fool to gather intelligence. I gave her a blank stare, turned around, and began circulating through the crowded living room, silently handing out champagne to wealthy women who barely glanced at me. About 30 minutes into the ordeal, the front door opened again. The ambient chatter in the room noticeably shifted. I watched from the corner as Colonel Diane Washington walked into the foyer. Derek's mother was a striking African-American woman in her late 50s, radiating an aura of absolute authority. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that screamed quiet wealth. Unlike the other women dripping in flashy diamonds, her presence alone commanded the room. Natalie practically sprinted across the marble floor to greet her, her high-pitched voice cutting through the soft jazz playing in the background. Oh, Diane, I am so thrilled you made it. Please come meet my friends. Let me get you a drink. Natalie snapped her fingers in my direction, treating me exactly like hired help. I walked over with the silver tray, keeping my posture neutral. I extended the tray toward Diane. Diane, this is my older sister, Rebecca. Natalie said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. She is going through a really rough patch right now, so we are just trying to keep her busy. You know how important it is to support family when they are struggling. Natalie smiled clearly, waiting for Diane to offer a sympathetic nod and dismiss me. But Diane did not reach for the champagne. Instead, her sharp dark eyes dropped down to the small set of keys dangling from the side of my clutch. Attached to the key ring was a worn bronze insignia. Crossed sabers, the emblem of the United States Army Cavalry. Diane stopped completely still. The polite society smile faded from her lips, replaced by a look of intense recognition. She looked up from the keys, scanning my posture, the square set of my shoulders, and the vigilant way my eyes tracked the room. She recognized the bearing immediately. She bypassed the tray of champagne entirely. Diane Washington stood up perfectly straight, extended her right hand, and spoke in a voice that demanded absolute silence. Cavalry. Diane stated, her tone shifting to address a fellow commanding officer. Yes, ma'am, I replied, shifting the tray to my left hand to shake hers. 1st Cavalry Division. Diane's grip was like iron. Derek mentioned you were in the service, but he failed to mention your rank. You are a major, correct? That is correct, Colonel, I answered smoothly. Diane smiled warmly. United States Marine Corps retired, she said proudly. It is an absolute honor to meet you, Major Lawson. Thank you for your service. Your deployment record is something your family must be incredibly proud of. It takes rare strength to command in that environment. The silence in the foyer was deafening. Natalie stood frozen, the fake smile dying on her face. The wealthy housewives nearby exchanged shocked glances. Natalie had spent 2 hours telling everyone I was an unemployed burden. Now, the respected matriarch of the Washington family was shaking my hand with profound reverence. But we are not talking about deployments, Natalie interrupted, panicking. Rebecca is just helping with the drinks today. Diane slowly turned her head. The warmth vanished from her eyes, instantly replaced by a freezing glare. A major in the United States Army does not serve drinks at a suburban party, Diane said coldly. If she is holding that tray, it is because she possesses the humility you clearly lack, Natalie. I suggest you find a waiter. Diane gently took the tray from my hands, placed it on a table, and gave me a respectful nod. Keep your head up, Major. Natalie turned bright red, completely humiliated. As Diane walked into the living room, embarrassed guests quickly followed her. Natalie glared at me with pure hatred before storming off to do damage control. The distraction was perfect. While every eye was glued to the drama Natalie was trying to fix, I slipped quietly down the hallway. I turned the brass knob of my father's home office, slid inside, and locked the door. It was time to hunt. The lock on my father's heavy oak office door was a standard residential tumbler. It was an illusion of security meant to keep out a nosy cleaning lady or a curious child. It was not designed to stop someone with federal tactical training. I slid a rigid bobby pin from my hair, snapped off the rubber tip, and used the tension bar on my heavy nail clippers. In less than 10 seconds, the internal pins clicked into alignment. I turned the knob and slipped inside, shutting the door silently behind me. The office smelled of stale scotch and expensive leather. I did not waste time looking at the framed photographs on the walls or the superficial paperwork scattered across his massive mahogany desk. Amateurs hide things under mattresses or behind paintings. Arrogant men hide things in plain sight, usually in the one place they assume no one else has the authority to look. I moved straight to the heavy steel filing cabinet tucked into the corner. The top 3 drawers were unlocked, filled with mundane tax returns and old contracting blueprints. The bottom drawer was locked with a heavy-duty padlock. Again, it was a pathetic deterrent. I bypassed it with a simple shim made from a piece of rigid plastic I kept in my wallet. I pulled the heavy drawer open. Inside, tucked beneath a stack of outdated insurance policies, was a thick manila folder and a black leather-bound ledger. I pulled both out and set them on the edge of the desk, turning on the small reading lamp. I opened the manila folder first. The top document hit me like a physical punch to the chest. It was a general power of attorney. It gave my father absolute unrestricted legal control over my finances, my property, and my assets. I scrolled my eyes down to the signature line. There was my name, Rebecca Lawson, signed in a crude approximation of my handwriting. Next to it was the bright blue stamp of a corrupt notary public. I looked at the date next to the forged signature. It was dated October of the previous year. My jaw tightened so hard my teeth ached. In October of last year, I was on my second combat deployment in the Middle East. I was stationed at a remote forward operating base with zero civilian internet access. I was dodging mortar fire and leading supply convoys through hostile territory. While I was bleeding for my country, my father was sitting in this comfortable air-conditioned office, forging my name to steal the only safe haven I had ever built for myself. I opened the black ledger, and the full sickening scope of his fraud was laid out in neat, handwritten columns. He had taken the forged power of attorney straight to a predatory private lender. Because I had exceptional credit and zero debt, he easily secured a massive second mortgage on my fully paid-off home. $250,000 wired directly into an account he controlled. I traced my finger down the ledger, tracking exactly where my stolen equity had gone. There was a wire transfer for $90,000 to a luxury European auto dealership. The memo line read, "Natalie's graduation gift." He had bought her a brand new Porsche, using the equity from the house I bought with hazard pay. Below that was a cascade of massive lavish expenses. $20,000 to the country club for the rehearsal dinner. $50,000 to a premium bridal caterer. $15,000 for imported floral arrangements. $30,000 for a custom wedding dress. The list went on and on, totaling over $150,000 in wedding expenses. My father was not a successful businessman generously paying for his golden child's dream wedding. He was a thief playing a high-stakes game of pretend. He had bankrupted my future to buy Natalie's affection and impress Derek's wealthy family. And he planned to trap me under a mountain of fraudulent debt, knowing that if I reported the crime, I would send my own father to federal prison. He banked on my silence. He banked on the scared, compliant little girl I used to be. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. I did not rush. I took crystal clear, high-resolution photographs of every single page. I photographed the forged power of attorney, making sure to capture the notary stamp clearly. I photographed the loan origination documents, the bank transfer receipts, and every single page of the black ledger. When I had over 50 photos securely backed up to my encrypted cloud server, I carefully placed the ledger and the folder back into the bottom drawer. I arranged the outdated insurance policies perfectly on top. I closed the drawer, snapped the padlock shut, and wiped the face of the lock with my sleeve to remove any fingerprints. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress. The anger I felt was no longer a hot, uncontrolled flame. It had crystallized into something cold, sharp, and absolute. My father had built his entire illusion of wealth on my stolen foundation. Now I possessed the exact tools required to detonate that foundation. I unlocked the office door and stepped back into the hallway just as the sound of Natalie's shrill voice echoed from the living room. I pasted a blank expression on my face and walked calmly back toward the party. The trap was fully loaded. Now I just had to wait for them to step into it. First thing Monday morning, I parked my car outside a sleek glass building in the downtown financial district. My father did not use a standard commercial bank for his shady dealings. He used a boutique private lending firm that prided itself on discreet wealth management and expedited approvals for high-net-worth clients. I walked through the rotating doors, completely ignoring the plush waiting area and the receptionist, and headed straight for the offices in the back. I found the nameplate I was looking for: Bradley Harrison, Senior Loan Officer. I stepped into his office. Bradley was a man in his late 30s wearing a custom-tailored suit and a patronizing smirk. He was typing on his computer, but when he looked up and saw me, his eyes quickly scanned my plain civilian clothes. I had deliberately worn a simple, unassuming beige trench coat. "Can I help you?" he asked, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "My name is Rebecca Lawson," I said. "I am here regarding the secondary mortgage on my property." Bradley let out a long, exaggerated sigh. He did not bother to stand up or offer me a chair. "Ah, yes. Richard told me you might show up eventually. He said you were having a hard time grasping the restructuring of your debts." He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, lacing his fingers together over his stomach. "Look, Rebecca, I know financial literacy can be overwhelming, especially when you have been out of the workforce for so long. Your father is doing you a massive favor by managing this asset for you. He stepped in to save your house from foreclosure. If you are here to ask for a cash advance or an allowance, I am afraid the account is fully restricted. You need his direct authorization for any withdrawals." The sheer arrogance of this man was astounding. My father had painted a picture of a deadbeat, financially illiterate daughter, and this highly paid banker had swallowed it whole without doing a single background check. I did not sit down. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out my leather credentials wallet. I flipped it open and tossed it flat onto the center of his pristine glass desk. The heavy metal of my Department of Defense security badge hit the glass with a loud, sharp crack. Right next to it was my Armed Forces identification card, clearly displaying my rank as major, my security clearance level, and my active duty status. Bradley jumped in his seat. The condescending smirk vanished from his face instantly. His eyes darted from the heavy federal badge to my face, his brain struggling to reconcile the pathetic daughter my father had described with the high-ranking military officer standing in front of him. "I am not here for an allowance, Bradley," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, authoritative register. "I am here because you authorized a $250,000 loan against my fully paid-off property while I was actively deployed in a combat zone in the Middle East." Bradley swallowed hard, his face turning the color of wet ash. "Ma'am, I assure you everything was done by the book. Your father provided a general power of attorney. A power of attorney that you completely failed to verify." I shot back, stepping closer to his desk. "Under federal banking regulations, you are required to perform basic due diligence. I want the original origination file with the wet ink signatures on this desk right now," he stammered, pulling at the collar of his shirt. "I cannot just hand over secure financial files. I have to call Richard. If you pick up that phone to call my father, my next call is to the Federal Bureau of Investigation," I warned him smoothly. "And then I will call the military police. We can discuss your direct complicity in federal wire fraud, identity theft, and violating the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Bring me the file, Bradley. Now." He did not argue. He scrambled to his feet so fast his leather chair slammed into the wall behind him. He practically ran out of the office to the secure filing room. Less than 3 minutes later, he returned. His hands were physically shaking as he slid a thick blue folder across the glass desk. I opened it. Right on top was the promissory note and the general power of attorney. I leaned over and inspected the ink. It was exactly as I had seen in my father's ledger, but seeing the original wet ink made it even more pathetic. The signature was a sloppy, looping cursive. My actual signature is sharp, angular, and highly distinct, refined over years of signing endless military supply manifests. Below the signature was the stamp of the notary public, a man named Kevin. My father had just paid off a corrupt local notary to stamp a forged document, assuming I would never have the leverage or the intelligence to uncover it. I looked up from the folder. Bradley was sweating through his expensive silk shirt. He was looking at a catastrophic failure of banking compliance, and he knew it. He had handed $250,000 to a con man because he could not be bothered to verify the identity of a woman he assumed was worthless. "I need to clear this up right now," Bradley stammered, his hand darting across the glass desk toward his sleek office phone. Let me just get Richard on the line. I am sure there is a perfectly reasonable explanation for this discrepancy. We can get this sorted out internally without any unnecessary escalations. Do not touch that phone, I commanded. My voice was quiet, but it carried the unmistakable edge of a direct military order. Bradley froze his fingers, hovering just inches above the receiver. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. He was used to dealing with wealthy, entitled clients who threw tantrums. He was not used to dealing with a commanding officer who was actively building a federal case against his institution. If you make that call, I continued, stepping closer to his desk, so he had to crane his neck to look at me. You cross the line from an incompetent banker to an active co-conspirator in federal fraud. I am just trying to resolve a client issue, he protested weakly, his hands slowly pulling back from the phone. Richard Lawson is not your client for this account, I said, tapping my index finger hard against the forged signature on the promissory note. I am. And I am officially invoking my rights under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Bradley swallowed heavily, the color draining completely from his face. As a senior loan officer, he knew exactly what the SCRA was. It is a robust piece of federal legislation designed specifically to protect active-duty military personnel from financial exploitation while they are deployed. Violating it is not a slap on the wrist. It carries catastrophic federal penalties, massive fines, and the immediate stripping of financial licenses. You authorized a $250,000 encumbrance on my primary residence while I was deployed in a combat zone, I reminded him, keeping my tone surgical and precise. You failed to verify the authenticity of the power of attorney. You failed to contact my military command to confirm my deployment status. You simply handed over the equity I bled for, so my father could buy luxury cars and fund a wedding. I did not know, Bradley pleaded, a thin sheen of sweat breaking out on his forehead. Richard has been a client here for years. He brought in the paperwork. It had a notary stamp. We processed dozens of these a week. I had no reason to suspect he was defrauding his own daughter. Ignorance is not a legal defense against federal statutes, I replied coldly. Right now, Bradley, you have a choice to make. Option 1 is you pick up that phone and tip off the man who committed identity theft. If you do that, my next call is to the Criminal Investigation Division of the United States Army. They will raid this office before lunchtime. They will seize every computer, every file, and every ledger in this building. Your career in finance will be over, and you will be facing federal indictment. Bradley shook his head rapidly, his carefully styled hair falling out of place. No, please, let us not do that. What is option 2? Option 2 is you do exactly as I say I instructed. First, you immediately freeze every single account associated with my name and my social security number. No withdrawals, no transfers, no secondary lines of credit. Put a hard lock on the mortgage and the auto loan. He pulled his keyboard toward him with shaking hands. Done. I am locking it down right now. What else? Second, you are legally bound to absolute silence pending a federal investigation. If Richard calls asking why his access is denied or why a transaction failed, you blame it on a routine internal security audit. You tell him the system is updating. You do not mention me. You do not mention the forgery. If he even suspects that I have been in this building, the deal is off, and the military police get involved. I understand, Bradley agreed quickly, hitting the final keystroke to lock the files. I will not say a word to him. Third, I continued watching his screen to ensure the freeze was active. You will provide me with certified stamped copies of every single document in this file. I want the origination papers, the forged power of attorney, the transfer receipts, and the entire payment history. Bradley nodded frantically, hitting the print command on his terminal. Yes, ma'am, printing them right now. I will stamp them myself. He scurried over to the heavy office printer, grabbed the stack of papers, and practically ran to his secondary desk to grab his official bank seal. The loud thud of the heavy metal stamp echoed in the quiet office as he certified each page. He placed the stack into a thick, secure envelope and handed it to me as if it were a live grenade. I took the envelope and tucked it safely inside my trench coat. I looked down at Bradley, who had collapsed back into his expensive leather chair, looking entirely defeated. "Remember, Bradley," I said, turning toward the door. "The SCRA is a federal shield, but I am the one holding the sword. Do not test me." I walked out of the glass office, ignoring the receptionist on my way out the front doors. The morning air felt sharp and clean. I slid into the driver's seat of my car and patted my coat pocket. The trap was officially set, locked, and armed. My father thought he was holding all the cards, blissfully unaware that I had just dismantled his entire bankroll. Now all I had to do was play my part and let him walk right into the execution chamber he had built for himself. I drove straight from the financial district to the headquarters of my father's contracting firm. The building was a hollow monument to his ego. The lobby featured imported Italian marble and massive glass walls, but the receptionist desk was empty, and half the lights in the administrative wing were turned off to save on electricity. His business was bleeding out, and I was supposedly his ultimate lifeline. I rode the elevator up to his executive suite. Before I opened the heavy oak door to his personal office, I took a slow, measured breath. I let my shoulders slump. I dropped my chin just a fraction of an inch and softened the sharp, alert focus in my eyes. I had to look like the broken, defeated daughter he expected to see. I had to play the pawn so he would not notice the trap closing around his ankles. I knocked quietly and pushed the door open. My father was sitting behind a massive desk, staring at a spreadsheet on his monitor with a deep scowl. When he saw me standing in the doorway, his scowl instantly transformed into a smug, victorious grin. He leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "Well," he said, his voice dripping with condescending satisfaction, "I assume you checked your email and finally came to your senses." I walked slowly into the room, keeping my gaze lowered. I stopped in front of the sleek glass coffee table, positioned between two leather guest chairs. I opened my purse and pulled out my smartphone, setting it face down on the glass surface. I had already activated the high-definition voice recorder application before stepping out of the elevator. "I will do it," I said, making my voice sound small and reluctant. "I will sign the Department of Defense vendor endorsement for your Fort Bradley contract. But I need you to promise me something first." My father let out a harsh, barking laugh. "You are in no position to make demands, Rebecca. But go ahead, let us hear it. I need you to stop," I pleaded, forcing a slight tremor into my voice. "I need you to stop threatening my military career. You cannot call General Davies. You cannot tell them I am mentally unstable. And I need you to stop humiliating me in front of Derek's family. If I sign this paper and get you the $15 million bid, you have to leave me alone." He stared at me for a long moment, soaking in my apparent submission, like a dry sponge absorbing water. His ego was so massive, so fragile, that he did not question my sudden surrender for a second. He thrived on breaking people, and he believed he had finally broken me. "See, Rebecca, was that so hard?" he mocked, standing up and walking around his desk. "You always have to make things so difficult, but fine. You sign the federal affidavit by the end of the day, and I will play nice at the wedding. I will even tell Derek's father that you are seeking therapy for your little outbursts. Now I need to print the hard copies for the notary. Wait here." He turned and walked toward the small printing room attached to his suite. As soon as his back was turned, I casually said I needed to use the restroom down the hall. I walked out of the office, leaving my phone sitting innocently on the coffee table, the microphone perfectly positioned to pick up every sound in the room. I stood in the empty hallway, counting the seconds. I did not actually go to the restroom. I just waited, knowing exactly what he would do the moment he thought he was alone. 5 minutes later, I walked back into his office. My father was sitting at his desk, cheerfully sorting through freshly printed contract documents. I picked up my phone from the glass table, slipped it into my purse, and told him I would electronically sign the files from my home computer. He waved me off dismissively, already counting his imaginary millions. I did not listen to the recording until I was safely locked inside my car in the parking garage. I connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth system and hit play. For the first minute, there was only the sound of the printer whirring, then the distinct sound of a phone dialing. Natalie picked up my father's voice echoed through my car speakers. He sounded absolutely giddy. "You will not believe it. The fat pig just caved." A pause as Natalie responded on the other end. "I am dead serious." He laughed, his voice cruel and sharp. She came crawling into my office looking like a kicked dog. All it took was one little threat to her pathetic army job, and she folded. "She is going to sign the Fort Bradley papers today. We are getting the 15 million. Another pause. I know, he agreed enthusiastically. "She is so stupid it is almost sad. She actually begged me to stop being mean to her at the wedding. Do not worry about a thing, sweetheart. You just focus on looking beautiful for Derek. Daddy has everything completely under control. We are going to bleed her dry and she will just smile and take it." I reached out and stopped the playback. The silence in my car was heavy. Any lingering trace of guilt, any tiny shred of daughterly obligation I might have still harbored evaporated instantly. He had just confessed to federal extortion on tape. He had explicitly confirmed his intent to defraud the Department of Defense. And he had done it while laughing with the sister who had happily spent my stolen money. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the garage. The evidence was absolute. Now it was time to bring the groom into the light. Derek stood at the polished marble counter of the city's premier florist, surrounded by the overwhelming scent of imported white roses and orchids. He was there to finalize the massive floral invoice for the wedding reception, a last-minute errand Natalie had insisted he handle. As an orthopedic surgeon, Derek made a very comfortable living, but the sheer volume of expenses he had absorbed over the past few weeks was starting to feel like a slow, bleeding wound. He pulled out his premium platinum credit card and handed it to the clerk with a polite smile. He expected a quick swipe and a printed receipt. Instead, the credit terminal beeped aggressively. "Declined." The clerk offered a tight, apologetic smile, sliding the metal card back across the marble counter. "It seems there is an issue with the chip, sir. Do you have another form of payment?" Derek frowned. He pulled out his secondary card, a travel rewards account with a limit more than high enough to cover the $15,000 floral bill. The clerk swiped it. The machine beeped again. Declined. A cold knot of confusion formed in Derek's stomach. He excused himself, his face burning with unfamiliar embarrassment, and stepped out onto the busy downtown sidewalk. He immediately opened his mobile banking application. The screen did not show his usual balances. Instead, it flashed a bright red error message indicating a hard freeze on all his accounts due to a suspicious linkage with a flagged financial entity. His heart rate spiked. He dialed Natalie's number, needing to know if the family's shared wedding accounts were experiencing the same catastrophic failure. Natalie picked up on the second ring. She did not say hello. She immediately launched into a frantic, breathless performance. "Derek, it is an absolute nightmare," she cried, her voice hitting a shrill, hysterical pitch. "It is Rebecca. She has completely lost her mind. She hacked into my father's bank accounts this morning. She froze all the family money out of pure spite because she was embarrassed at the rehearsal dinner. Daddy is trying to fix it, but our accounts are completely locked down." Derek stood perfectly still on the sidewalk, listening to her hyperventilate. He was a man trained in the scientific method. He diagnosed complex bone fractures, analyzed MRI scans, and executed precise surgical interventions. He operated entirely on logic, evidence, and undeniable facts. And Natalie's frantic narrative was fundamentally flawed on multiple levels. Derek interrupted, keeping his voice carefully steady to mask his growing suspicion. "If Rebecca hacked your father's accounts, why are my personal credit cards being declined? Why is my bank telling me my accounts are frozen due to a linked financial flag?" There was a sudden sharp silence on the other end of the line. The hysterical crying abruptly stopped. Natalie stuttered frantically, trying to pivot her story. Well, she must have hacked the wedding vendor portal. You know how crazy she is, Derek. She is just trying to ruin my perfect weekend. She is jealous. Derek closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose as another massive discrepancy hit him like a physical blow. Your father told my parents he was paying for all the floral arrangements. He made a massive speech about it. Why was I just handed a $15,000 invoice? Actually, why have I been paying for almost everything this month? The catering deposit, the honeymoon flights, the custom dress alterations. Your father swore he was covering the wedding, but my credit cards have been taking the hit. Natalie's voice grew instantly defensive, sharp and biting. Are you seriously worrying about money right now when my sister is literally terrorizing us? We will pay you back, Derek. You are a successful doctor. You can float it for a few days. Stop being so cheap. Derek did not reply. He thought about the rehearsal dinner. He thought about his groomsman Jason standing at rigid attention and saluting Rebecca. He thought about the severe combat blast scars on her arms and the heavy black American Express card she threw on the table to pay her own way. He was raised by a Marine Corps colonel. He knew exactly what it meant to hold the rank of major in the United States Army. A woman holding that level of military command and federal security clearance does not throw a petty tantrum and illegally hack a civilian bank account. The federal penalties for wire fraud would mean an instant court-martial and years in Leavenworth. Rebecca had absolutely nothing to gain and her entire life to lose by doing something so incredibly reckless. On the other hand, Richard Lawson's contracting business was constantly rumored to be struggling. And Natalie was lying. She was lying so poorly, it was insulting to his intelligence. I have to go. Natalie. Derek said, his voice flat, cold, and entirely devoid of its usual warmth. I will handle the florist. He hung up the phone before she could say another word or spin another lie. He stood on the sidewalk for a long time, watching the city traffic blur past him. The blinders he had worn for the past year were finally coming off. He had trusted Natalie implicitly, but the mathematical reality of his bank accounts told a completely different story than her fake tears. He opened his contacts list and scrolled down. He bypassed Natalie. He bypassed his future father-in-law. He stopped when he found the number he had saved just in case of wedding emergencies. He needed the truth, and he knew exactly which sister had it. Derek's text message flashed on my screen exactly 20 minutes after I left my father's office. It was brief and stripped of his usual politeness. Meet me at the downtown roasting company in half an hour. We need to talk. I replied with a simple confirmation, altered my route, and headed toward the coffee shop. I arrived early, deliberately choosing a secluded booth in the back corner where we would not be overheard. When Derek walked through the heavy glass doors, he looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. His usually immaculate posture was rigid with tension. He scanned the room, locked eyes with me, and marched straight to the booth. He slid into the leather seat across from me. He did not take off his jacket. He did not order a coffee. He came in hot, fully prepared to defend the woman he was about to marry. What exactly did you do, Rebecca? He demanded. His voice was low, but it carried the unmistakable sharp edge of absolute frustration. Natalie is at her parents' house having a complete hysterical meltdown. My credit cards are declining everywhere I go. My primary bank just informed me that my accounts are frozen due to a suspicious financial linkage. He leaned forward, planting his elbows firmly on the table. Natalie told me you maliciously hacked into your father's business accounts this morning. She said you locked down all the family money just to ruin the wedding out of petty spite. So tell me right now, did you do this? I sat perfectly still, letting him vent. I watched the conflicting emotions battle across his face. He wanted to be the protective fiancé. He wanted to believe the woman he loved. But Derek was a brilliant orthopedic surgeon. His entire career was built on diagnosing structural failures by looking at hard evidence. His logical brain was already screaming at him that Natalie's story made zero sense, which was why he was sitting here demanding the truth instead of calling the police. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. Derek blinked, clearly thrown off by my complete lack of defensiveness or anger. He opened his mouth to argue, but I did not give him the chance. I reached down into my leather tote bag and pulled out the thick blue envelope I had secured from Bradley at the bank. I had spent the previous night organizing the contents, tabbing the most damning pages with bright red adhesive markers. I placed the thick federal dossier flat on the wooden table. I rested my hand on top of it for a brief second, then slowly slid it across the surface until it sat directly in front of him. "Your family has a proud military history, Derek," I said, keeping my tone surgical and completely devoid of emotion. "Your mother is a retired Marine Corps colonel. I suggest you read this before you tie your last name to a federal crime." Derek stared at the blue envelope. He looked at it as if it were a venomous snake coiled on the table. He looked back up at me, searching my face for any sign of a bluff. Finding none, his medical training took over. He approached the folder the same way he would approach a complex patient file. He opened the flap and pulled out the thick stack of bank-certified documents. He flipped open the cover. The first page was the general power of attorney. His eyes scanned the legal jargon, dropping straight down to the signature line. He stared at the looping, sloppy cursive. "That is not your handwriting," he stated flatly. "It is not," I confirmed. "Keep reading. Look at the date." Derek's eyes darted to the top right corner. October of last year. His brow furrowed in deep concentration. "Wait. In October of last year, you were on active deployment. You were stationed in the Middle East. You could not possibly have stood in front of a civilian notary in this state." He turned the page. The next document was the loan origination file. He saw the sum: $250,000 taken out as a secondary mortgage against my fully paid-off home. His breathing grew shallow as he flipped to the next tab section. These were the bank transfer receipts. I watched his eyes track the numbers. He saw the wire transfer for $90,000 sent directly to the luxury auto dealership. The exact make and model of Natalie's brand new Porsche was listed in the memo line. He turned another page. $50,000 wired to the premium bridal caterer, $20,000 to the country club for the venue deposit, $15,000 for imported floral arrangements. The numbers perfectly matched the lavish lifestyle my father and Natalie had been aggressively flaunting. Derek sat frozen, staring at the undeniable proof that the woman he was about to marry was funding her dream wedding with stolen money. "He did not hack anything," Derek whispered, the horrifying realization washing all the color from his face. "Your father stole your identity. And Natalie helped him spend the money," I added coldly. "They committed federal wire fraud and identity theft. I initiated a legal freeze on my accounts this morning using the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Because your wedding accounts are financially linked to Natalie, the bank froze yours as a secondary security measure. I did not hack anyone, Derek. I stopped a crime in progress." Derek stared at me, the gravity of my words hanging in the air between us. He slowly lowered the bank-certified transfer receipts back onto the table. His hands, usually so steady in the operating room, were trembling with a mixture of profound shock and rising fury. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his phone, and unlocked the screen, pulling up his own locked banking application. He placed his phone right next to my father's forged ledger. He began matching the dates. "When Natalie asked for my credit card for the caterer," he said, his voice sounding hollow, "she told me her father was having a temporary liquidity issue because of a massive new construction contract. She said he just needed a bridge loan for 72 hours. That was 3 weeks ago." He looked at the ledger. "He transferred $50,000 of your stolen equity to the caterer 2 months ago." "He kept his money," I explained calmly. "He used my stolen house equity to buy the Porsche and pad his failing business accounts. And then he used your credit cards to actually pay the wedding vendors. He effectively made you finance your own wedding while claiming all the credit, and he kept my $250,000 as his personal slush fund." Derek dragged a heavy hand over his face. He leaned back against the leather booth, staring up at the ceiling, as if the entire structure of his life was actively collapsing around him. He was a man who operated on trust. In his world, a promise was a binding contract. He had welcomed Natalie into his family, introduced her to his proud, honorable parents, and defended her against every minor criticism. She looked me right in the eyes this morning. Derek whispered, the devastation in his voice slowly hardening into something much colder. She was crying. She swore to me that you were a malicious, jealous sister trying to destroy her happiness. She played the victim perfectly. She knew her father had stolen your identity. She knew I was paying for everything. She knew, and she lied to my face without blinking. I did not offer him empty comfort. I did not tell him I was sorry. Derek did not need pity. He needed clarity, and he was currently rapidly processing the greatest betrayal of his life. My family has spent decades perfecting the art of the con, I told him. They prey on decent, honorable people because they view empathy as a weakness to be exploited. Natalie is not a victim of my father's manipulation. She is a willing, active participant. She wanted the lifestyle, and she did not care who had to bleed to finance it. Derek closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the devastated groom was gone. The man sitting across from me was the son of a Marine Corps colonel. His posture straightened, his jaw locked tightly. The soft, accommodating warmth that usually defined his personality evaporated, replaced by a rigid, unforgiving steel. He looked at the federal dossier on the table, then looked directly at me. I am not marrying a grifter. He stated, his tone absolute. I am not tying my family name, my career, and my assets to a syndicate of thieves. I am going to call my lawyer right now. I am going to cancel the wedding, cancel the vendors, and file a police report for the credit card fraud. He reached for his phone, his thumb hovering over his contacts list. Wait! I commanded, keeping my voice low but sharp enough to stop him instantly. He paused, looking at me with intense frustration. Wait for what, Rebecca? I have the proof right here. Why would I wait another second? Because if you cancel this wedding today, you will never see a single dime of your money again, I explained. My father's business is actively failing. He has zero liquid assets left. If you walk away now, he will immediately declare bankruptcy. His corporate lawyers will shield whatever cash he has left, and your credit card companies will hold you liable for the authorized charges. You gave Natalie the physical cards. Proving fraud on those will take years of litigation. Derek gripped his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. So what? I just let them get away with it. I stand up at an altar and pretend to marry a woman who belongs in a federal prison. You are looking at this like a civilian, Derek, I said, leaning forward across the table. You are reacting to the immediate injury. You need to look at the battlefield. Right now, they think they have won. They think my accounts are frozen because of a bank error, and they think you are just going to blindly pay the remaining bills to save the wedding. They are completely relaxed, arrogant, and vulnerable. Derek stared at me, the anger in his eyes shifting into sharp, tactical focus. He slowly put his phone down on the table. You do not just want to stop them. He realized, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You want to obliterate them. My father threatened my military career to cover up his federal crimes, I replied evenly. My sister happily wore clothes bought with my stolen blood money and then threw wine in my face for existing. Yes, I want to dismantle their entire lives, but I cannot do it alone. I need the groom to play his part. Derek looked at the forged signature on the documents, then looked back into my eyes. The hesitation was completely gone. What do we do? He asked. I leaned forward, lowering my voice so only he could hear. You do exactly what Natalie expects you to do. You apologize for doubting her. You play the stressed but supportive fiancé, and you go through with the wedding ceremony on Saturday. Derek recoiled, his posture stiffening as if I had struck him. You want me to stand at an altar and vow my life to a woman who just tried to frame you for federal hacking. You want my parents to sit in the front row and witness a complete lie. I want you to use the law to your advantage, I corrected him. keeping my tone perfectly measured. Derek, think about the timeline. If you walk into your lawyer's office today and cancel the wedding, my father will panic. He knows his business is completely dead. He will immediately file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. That filing puts an automatic federal stay on all his debts. He will hide the Porsche by transferring the title. He will liquidate whatever cash he has left in offshore accounts or dummy corporations. You will be holding the bag for over $100,000 in vendor charges. You will be stuck in civil litigation for the next 5 years trying to prove he defrauded you, paying hourly attorney fees just to chase ghosts. Derek's jaw tightened. As a highly educated professional, he knew I was right. Civil courts moved agonizingly slow, and my father was an expert at hiding assets from creditors. But I continued tapping the spot on the table where the blue folder had been. If you wait until the ceremony, everything changes. The moment the officiant pronounces you husband and wife, the legal framework of your relationship shifts from a civil contract to marital law. In this state, debts and assets acquired during a marriage under fraudulent pretenses are subject to immediate emergency injunctions. Derek was sharp. He caught on immediately, his medical mind processing the legal diagnosis. If I file for an annulment based on financial fraud the morning after the wedding, a family court judge has the authority to immediately freeze her assets to prevent capital flight. Exactly, I nodded. Once you are legally married, even for 24 hours, she cannot hide behind her father's corporate veil. You can petition the court to seize the $90,000 Porsche to recoup the wedding costs she stole from you. You can freeze her personal bank accounts. You effectively trap her in a legal cage where she is personally liable for the financial damage she caused. But to do that, the marriage has to be legally finalized on paper. Derek sat back, processing the brutal reality of the plan. It required him to perform an incredible act of deception. He had to look into the eyes of the woman who betrayed him, smile, and say, "I do," knowing he was actively signing her financial death warrant. He had to let his proud, honorable parents attend a sham ceremony. "Can you do it?" I asked quietly. "Can you walk back into that house today? Look Natalie in the face and pretend you still love her? Because if you flinch, if you show even an ounce of suspicion, they will smell it. They will cut their losses, burn the evidence, and run." Derek looked down at his hands. For a long moment, the booth was completely silent, except for the low hum of the coffee shop espresso machine. He thought about his parents. His father, a man of intense integrity, and his mother, the retired Marine colonel, who commanded respect simply by walking into a room. To let them be mocked and used by a family of con artists was the ultimate insult. He thought about the sheer arrogance of my father and the cruelty of my sister. When he looked back up at me, his eyes were cold and perfectly clear. The surgeon was ready to operate. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. I slid the blue envelope back into my leather tote bag. "First, you call Natalie. You tell her your bank resolved the issue. You tell her it was a security glitch because of the unusual volume of wedding purchases. You apologize for stressing her out and promise to make it up to her." "Done," he agreed without hesitation. "And the vendors. You pay the florist," I instructed. "You pay the final catering bill. You let them think they have secured the bag. Meanwhile, I will contact my military legal liaison in the Criminal Investigation Division. We are going to coordinate the timeline. When my father stands up to give his speech at the reception, he is going to brag about his new military contract. That is when I drop the hammer. That is when I publicly deny his bid and expose the forgery to the entire room." Derek nodded slowly, a dark sense of anticipation settling over him. "And when the room turns on him, I drop my own hammer. I tell her I am seizing the car, locking my credit lines, and filing for annulment. We destroy their public image, their financial safety net, and their freedom, all in the span of 10 minutes," I confirmed. "They wanted a lavish wedding. We are going to give them a spectacle they will never forget." Derek extended his hand across the table. It was not a friendly handshake. It was a binding pact between two people united by a common enemy. I reached out and took it. His grip was firm and absolute. "Let us go plan a wedding," Derek said. Saturday morning arrived with bright, cloudless skies. It was the perfect backdrop for the perfect lie. I walked into the bridal suite at the country club at exactly 8 o'clock, carrying a garment bag that contained the ultimate symbol of my sister's petty cruelty. Natalie had insisted on custom selecting the bridesmaid dresses. While the other four bridesmaids, all her wealthy sorority sisters, wore flattering, elegant gowns in soft blush pink, my dress was a glaring exception. I stepped out of the dressing room and looked in the full-length mirror. The dress was an atrocious shade of neon green. It was made of cheap, stiff taffeta that bunched awkwardly at the waist and had completely unflattering, puffy sleeves. It looked like a discarded costume from a terrible high school play. It was intentionally ordered 2 sizes too small, pulling tight across my shoulders and digging painfully into my ribs. Natalie wanted me to look hideous. She wanted me to stand next to her looking like a grotesque, mismatched afterthought to highlight her own manufactured perfection. Natalie sat in a velvet chair while a professional makeup artist carefully applied her contour. She looked at me through the reflection of the vanity mirror. A cruel, satisfied smile spread across her face. "Oh, Rebecca," she cooed, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I am so sorry the tailor could not do more with the fit. It is just so hard to find anything that flatters your shape. But you are a good sister for wearing it anyway." The other bridesmaids giggled behind their champagne flutes. I did not react. I simply smoothed down the stiff fabric and took my place in the corner of the room. I did not care about the dress. The cheap taffeta was nothing compared to the heavy body armor I was used to wearing. Let her have her petty victory. It would be her last. An hour later, the photographer arrived to take the pre-wedding family portraits out on the manicured lawn. My mother Patricia swept onto the patio wearing a lavish silver gown that undoubtedly cost thousands of the dollars my father had stolen from me. She took one look at me standing in the lineup and let out a dramatic, exasperated sigh. "Really?" Rebecca Patricia complained loudly, waving her hand at my dress. "Could you not have done something with your hair at least? You are completely ruining the aesthetic of the photos. Just step to the back. Further back. Hide behind Kenneth, so we do not see that awful neon color clashing with the floral arches." I stepped to the very back of the group, completely obscured by my brother Kenneth's broad shoulders. I stood in the shade while the rest of my family bathed in the bright camera flashes, smiling their fake bright smiles. I kept my face perfectly neutral, but underneath the stiff taffeta sleeve, my right hand reached across to gently touch the face of my Apple Watch. I was not looking at the time. I was monitoring the secure notifications silently vibrating against my wrist. My military legal liaison had confirmed that the Criminal Investigation Division was already in position. Unmarked federal vehicles were parked less than 2 miles away, waiting for my signal. More importantly, I was waiting for the final banking notifications to clear. Derek had paid the last of the vendor bills that morning, as instructed, lulling my father into a false sense of security. The trap was completely set. All the federal wire transfers were locked in the system, creating a permanent paper trail of fraud. From across the lawn, I saw Derek walk out of the clubhouse with his groomsman. He wore a sharp-tailored black tuxedo. He looked incredibly handsome, but as our eyes briefly met over the heads of the wedding party, I saw the cold surgical focus behind his polite smile. He was playing his part flawlessly. He greeted my parents warmly, shaking my father's hand and complimenting my mother's dress. My father beamed, puffing out his chest. Richard looked at Derek like a prize he had successfully won. He clapped Derek on the shoulder, leaning in to whisper something that made Derek chuckle. It was a masterful performance. My father truly believed he was the smartest man in the world, manipulating a wealthy doctor into funding his family's lifestyle while retaining his stolen fortune. Natalie rushed forward, lifting the skirt of her $30,000 dress, and threw her arms around Derek's neck. Derek held her, smiling for the cameras as the shutter clicked rapidly. He did not flinch. He embraced the woman who was actively defrauding him with the terrifying calm of a man holding an executioner's axe. I looked down and smiled as the federal freeze finally cleared. While I was enduring the humiliation of the family photos on the manicured lawn, Derek was fighting his own psychological battle inside the mahogany-paneled Groom's suite on the second floor of the clubhouse. He stood in front of a full-length gilded mirror, methodically adjusting the black silk bow tie around his collar. The suite was designed for pre-wedding celebrations, fully stocked with crystal tumblers and a bottle of aged scotch that my father had proudly ordered using Derek's stolen credit limit. But the atmosphere in the room held absolutely no joy. It felt exactly like a forward operating base hours before a massive kinetic strike. Jason Carter stood by the large bay window overlooking the rear of the property. Instead of holding a drink and making the usual jokes expected of a groomsman, the young Army lieutenant was completely dialed in. He kept his stance loose but highly alert, his eyes carefully tracking the movement in the lower parking lot. Jason pulled his phone from his tuxedo pocket, reading a secure text message that had just come through his encrypted military channel. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and turned to face Derek. "We are completely green," Jason said quietly, his voice carrying the crisp efficiency of a military briefing. "I have visual confirmation on 3 unmarked federal vehicles. The Criminal Investigation Division agents are parked near the service entrance and blocking the secondary golf cart paths. Local law enforcement is standing by a mile down the road to assist with the arrest warrants. They have the entire perimeter locked down. They are just waiting for the major to give the green light." Derek let out a slow, measured breath. He walked over to the heavy wooden table and picked up his gold cufflinks. They were a treasured family heirloom from his grandfather, a man who had served with distinction and survived brutal combat. His family prided themselves on honor, absolute truth, and unwavering duty. Fastening the gold links to his crisp white cuffs, Derek felt a wave of profound physical disgust wash over his entire body. He was about to walk down an aisle in front of 300 people and legally bind himself to a woman who possessed absolutely no moral compass. He thought about Natalie. He thought about her fake hysterical tears when her credit cards declined. He thought about the seamless, effortless way she lied directly to his face, trying to frame her own sister for federal hacking to cover her tracks. The sheer sociopathy of her actions was staggering. She was fully prepared to let my military career be destroyed just so she could keep driving a luxury sports car and wearing designer clothes bought with stolen money. The thought of holding her hands at the altar and kissing her made Derek's stomach physically churn. "Are you going to be able to stomach this?" Jason asked, watching the intense conflict play out across Derek's face. Jason knew exactly how high the stakes were. He knew that if Derek showed even a fraction of his true feelings, the entire operation would instantly collapse. Derek looked down at his polished shoes. He thought about his mother and father sitting in the front row, completely unaware that this beautiful wedding was actually a highly coordinated sting operation. He hated deceiving them even temporarily, but he knew the legal reality I had laid out for him. If he walked out of that suite and canceled the wedding, my father would instantly file for bankruptcy protection. The money would vanish into offshore accounts or shell companies. Natalie would walk away completely unburdened by the financial devastation she helped cause. The only way to trap them was to lock Natalie into a legal marriage, changing her status to a marital asset holder, subject to immediate family court injunctions. He had to cross the finish line to spring the trap. Derek looked up, meeting Jason's eyes in the mirror. "I am a surgeon, Jason." Derek said, his voice dropping to a cold clinical register. "When I find a severe infection spreading through a patient, I do not just put a bandage over it and walk away. I cut it out completely, no matter how much it bleeds in the moment. I am ready." Jason gave him a firm, respectful nod. He stepped away from the window and opened the heavy wooden door of the suite. "After you, doctor." Derek grabbed his custom black suit jacket and slid it over his shoulders. He smoothed down the lapels, rolling his shoulders back to release the final bit of tension. He locked his facial features into a flawless mask of polite, joyful anticipation. He buried his absolute disgust behind a charming, handsome smile. That was when he walked out of the clubhouse and joined us on the front lawn, for the family photos, stepping directly into the bright sunshine, right as the federal wire transfers cleared and the trap officially set. The ceremony took place in the grand ballroom of the country club, transformed into an excessive floral wonderland that looked entirely ridiculous against the backdrop of my father's impending bankruptcy. Hundreds of white orchids dripped from the ceiling, and a massive custom floral arch framed the altar. The string quartet played a sweeping classical piece as the guests took their seats. I stood at the very back of the bridesmaid line, the stiff taffeta of my neon green dress rustling aggressively with every movement. My mother, seated in the front row next to my father, kept shooting me warning glares, silently demanding that I remain invisible. The music swelled, and Natalie began her walk down the aisle. She looked radiant, playing the part of the deeply emotional bride to absolute perfection. She kept a small, delicate smile on her face, occasionally dabbing her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. As she reached the altar, my father kissed her cheek and handed her off to Derek. Derek took her hands. His posture was flawless, his expression completely unreadable to anyone who did not know the raging storm underneath. The officiant, a distinguished older man with a booming theatrical voice, began the ceremony. He spoke at length about love, trust, and the sanctity of the vows they were about to take. He talked about building a foundation on absolute honesty. Every word felt like a sharp, ironic blade. Natalie nodded solemnly, gazing up at Derek with wide, innocent eyes. Then came the traditional question. The officiant paused, looking out over the crowd of 300 guests. If anyone can show just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let them speak now. The silence that followed was heavy and pregnant with expectation. Natalie slowly turned her head. She did not look at the crowd. She looked directly at me. Her eyes narrowed into a sharp, challenging glare. She was practically daring me to say something. She knew I had the power to detonate the entire charade. She knew I hated her, and she fully expected me to throw a petty tantrum and ruin her perfect moment. She was waiting for the satisfaction of watching me get dragged out by security. I did not move. I did not speak. I slowly raised the small glass of water I had carried from the bridal suite and took a slow, deliberate sip. I met her glare with absolute chilling indifference. Natalie's face twitched with a fleeting expression of confusion. She had prepared for an explosion, but my silence completely unnerved her. She quickly turned her attention back to the officiant, an uneasy tension settling into her shoulders. "Please proceed," my father said loudly from the front row, desperate to move past the awkward pause. The officiant continued. He asked Derek for his vows. Derek's voice was steady and remarkably calm as he repeated the traditional words. He promised to hold her in sickness and in health. He promised to forsake all others. He slipped the heavy platinum band onto Natalie's finger. He did not stumble over a single syllable. He was delivering the performance of a lifetime, executing the legal maneuver with surgical precision. Then it was Natalie's turn. She recited her vows with breathless emotion, her voice trembling perfectly on cue. She promised him her whole heart. She promised absolute loyalty and unending truth. She slid the ring onto his finger, completely unaware that she was essentially locking the handcuffs onto her own wrists. "By the power vested in me by the state," the officiant announced, his voice echoing through the massive ballroom, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Derek leaned down and kissed her. It was brief and entirely devoid of passion, but the crowd erupted into applause regardless. My father stood up and cheered loudly, pumping his fist in the air. My mother wiped away actual tears of joy. The string quartet launched into a triumphant recessional march. As Derek and Natalie turned to face the cheering crowd, Derek looked past his new wife and found my eyes again. We exchanged a single, almost imperceptible nod. The ceremony was over. The marriage license was officially signed by the officiant and the witnesses. The civil contract had instantly transformed into a binding marital union under state law. Natalie was no longer just my father's daughter. She was Derek's legal spouse. The protective barrier of my father's corporate shielding had just been stripped away. Any debts she acquired, any assets she held, and any financial fraud she participated in were now subject to immediate jurisdiction under family court. The trap had not just closed, it had locked permanently. I smoothed down my hideous green dress and joined the procession out of the ballroom. The real performance was about to begin at the reception, and I had a front row seat to the execution. The reception ballroom was a monument to financial delusion. As the heavy double doors swung open, 300 guests poured into a space that had been transformed into an absolute spectacle of excessive wealth. A towering 6-tier wedding cake decorated with delicate edible gold leaf dominated the center of the room. A massive ice sculpture of 2 intertwined swans slowly melted next to a literal champagne tower, where waiters in crisp white jackets constantly poured vintage cristal. The floral arrangements on each table were so massive that guests had to lean around them just to speak to one another. Every single detail screamed money. But as I walked to my assigned seat at the long bridal party table, the only thing I saw was a crime scene. I looked at the imported silk drapery covering the walls and saw the fraudulent second mortgage on my home. I looked at the perfectly seared filet mignon placed in front of me and saw Derek's maxed-out credit cards. The entire room was a beautiful, shimmering lie, and my father was the grand architect standing proudly at the center of it. Richard spent the first 2 hours of the reception working the room like a politician on election night. He walked from table to table, shaking hands, clapping men on the shoulder, and accepting endless praise for throwing the social event of the season. He radiated a smug, untouchable arrogance. He truly believed he had pulled off the ultimate con. He had stolen $250,000 from his own daughter, forced her to commit federal contracting fraud to secure his business, and manipulated a wealthy surgeon into financing the rest. In his mind, he was a genius. At the sweetheart table, Natalie was practically vibrating with joy. She wore a second designer gown for the reception, this one covered in thousands of hand-sewn crystals. She leaned into Derek, smiling for the continuous flashes of the event photographers. Derek played his role with terrifying perfection. He held her hand, whispered in her ear, and smiled back. Not a single person in that room, least of all Natalie, could sense the cold surgical trap waiting just beneath his charming exterior. As the dinner plates were finally cleared by the army of waitstaff, the 8-piece live band softly faded out their jazz set. The ambient chatter of 300 wealthy guests began to quiet down. It was time for the toasts. My father did not just walk up to the microphone, he practically strutted. He climbed the 3 small steps to the stage set up near the dance floor, grabbed the wireless microphone from the stand, and tapped it twice. A sharp thump echoed through the massive ballroom, commanding absolute silence. "Good evening, everyone," my father began, his voice booming with artificial warmth. "Look at this room. Just look at how beautiful my daughter is tonight." The crowd offered a polite, warm round of applause. Natalie beamed from the sweetheart table, blowing him a kiss. "You know, throwing a wedding like this is not easy," Richard continued, pacing slowly across the stage with the microphone. "It takes vision. It takes dedication. And yes, let us be honest, it takes a whole lot of capital." A few of his wealthy business associates in the front row chuckled knowingly. But when my little girl came to me and said she had found the man of her dreams, I told her one thing, my father said, placing his free hand over his heart in a gesture of fake paternal devotion. I said, "Natalie, you spare absolutely no expense. You get the best venue, the best food, the best flowers. Because Daddy will take care of it. Daddy always takes care of his family." I sat perfectly still in my neon green taffeta dress, taking a slow sip of sparkling water. The sheer audacity of his lie was staggering. He was looking directly at Derek's parents, Colonel Diane Washington, and her husband, implicitly bragging to them about his immense financial superiority. "And I am incredibly blessed to be in a position to provide this beautiful day," Richard boasted, his chest puffing out even further. "Because the Lawson family business is stronger than ever. In fact, I have a little announcement to make tonight. A little celebration on top of a celebration. He paused for dramatic effect, leaning into the microphone. As of yesterday, my contracting firm has officially secured a massive $15 million partnership with the United States Department of Defense. A loud murmur of impressed whispers rippled through the ballroom. That was a staggering amount of money, an undeniable validation of his corporate success. My father looked directly at me across the room. He shot me a smug, victorious wink. He was openly gloating. He was flaunting the federal fraud he forced me to commit, rubbing my face in my own apparent defeat. He thought I had signed the affidavit endorsing his failing company, securing his financial future while he drained mine. "We are expanding, we are thriving, and the future is brighter than ever," Richard announced loudly, raising his glass of champagne toward the ceiling. "To Natalie and Derek, and to the unstoppable success of this family." The crowd erupted into cheers, raising their glasses to toast the lying thief standing on the stage. The applause rolled through the ballroom like a wave of validation, washing over my father and feeding his insatiable ego. He stood at the edge of the stage, soaking in the admiration of 300 wealthy guests. He had the world exactly where he wanted it. But for a narcissist like Richard, simply winning was never enough. He needed to make sure someone else lost, and he needed everyone to watch it happen. His eyes locked onto me, sitting quietly at the end of the bridal party table in my hideous green dress. A cruel, triumphant spark lit up his face. He raised his hand, gesturing for the crowd to lower their glasses. The room slowly quieted down, the clinking of crystal and silver fading into an expectant silence. But we cannot celebrate our massive financial success without remembering those who are less fortunate, my father said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. Family is about lifting each other up when they hit rock bottom. Family is about providing a safety net when certain people refuse to help themselves. He pointed directly at me. The spotlight operator, sensing a dramatic moment, swung a bright beam of light across the room, illuminating my stiff taffeta dress for everyone to see. "Come up here, sweetheart," my father called out into the microphone, waving his hand to beckon me forward. "Let us give a round of applause for my struggling daughter. We support our charity cases." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. The applause that followed was polite but distinctly uncomfortable. A few of the guests exchanged uneasy glances, shifting awkwardly in their elegant chairs. It was one thing to brag about wealth, but publicly humiliating a family member at a lavish wedding crossed a line of social decency. Still, they clapped, assuming this was some bizarre family dynamic of tough love that they simply did not understand. My mother hissed at me from the front row table, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Just go up there and thank him," she whispered harshly, her fake smile glued in place for the cameras. "Do not cause a scene, Rebecca. Play along." I did not look at her. I placed my water glass gently on the linen tablecloth. I stood up, smoothing the front of my neon green dress. I did not slouch. I did not shrink away from the bright spotlight blinding my vision. I rolled my shoulders back, feeling the familiar tension release from my muscles, and stepped out from behind the long table. The walk from my chair to the stage took exactly 40 seconds. In those 40 seconds, the atmosphere in the grand ballroom began to subtly shift. I did not walk like a beaten, unemployed charity case. I walked with the measured, predatory stride of a military officer entering a hostile engagement zone. My spine was perfectly straight. My chin was parallel to the floor. My eyes were locked dead ahead, completely ignoring the hundreds of people staring at me. The cheap, stiff fabric of the dress rustled loudly, but my footsteps were silent and deliberate. At the back of the room, near the heavy double doors, Jason stepped out of the shadows. He stood at parade rest, his hands clasped behind his back, watching my approach with quiet intensity. Derek sat at the sweetheart table, casually shifting his weight and sitting up a little straighter. Next to him, Natalie frowned. The fake radiant smile she had worn all night began to falter at the edges. She expected me to walk up to the stage with my head down, crying tears of humiliation. Instead, she was watching a predator casually stroll into the trap she had built for herself. I reached the wooden steps leading up to the stage. I climbed them without looking down. My father stood in the center, a wide, arrogant grin plastered across his face. He held his arm out fully, expecting me to step into his embrace so he could play the benevolent savior for the event photographers. I stopped exactly 2 feet away from him, remaining entirely out of his reach. My father let his arm drop, his smile twitching in brief annoyance. He covered it quickly, leaning into the microphone. "Let us hear it for Rebecca," he said heartily, forcing a chuckle. "I know she wants to say a few words of gratitude to the family that has kept a roof over her head." He held the microphone out to me. He thought I was terrified of his earlier threat to ruin my military career. He thought I was going to thank him for the $15 million contract I had supposedly endorsed. I reached out and took the heavy metal microphone from his hand. The moment my fingers wrapped around the handle, I felt a profound sense of absolute control. The power dynamic in the room flipped in a fraction of a second, though my father was still completely unaware. I turned my back on him. I stepped to the very edge of the stage, looking out over the sea of faces. I found Colonel Diane Washington sitting at the VIP table. I gave her a single respectful nod. She sat perfectly still, her sharp eyes studying my posture. She knew instantly that something was about to happen. I looked at Natalie, who was now gripping the edge of her table, her knuckles turning white. Then I lifted the microphone. I did not look embarrassed. I looked absolutely lethal. I brought the heavy metal microphone to my lips. "Thank you, Richard," I said, my voice cutting through the expectant silence in the massive ballroom. "I appreciate the warm introduction." I turned my gaze away from him, looking out over the sea of 300 wealthy guests. "And speaking of your new military contract at Fort Bradley, the one you just told everyone guarantees the financial future of this family." I let the words hang in the air for a brief second, ensuring every single person was listening. As the active director of procurement and logistics for that exact military installation, I am officially denying your bid. Effective immediately. The collective gasp from the crowd sounded like all the oxygen being violently sucked out of the room. The clinking of crystal glasses stopped completely. The live band members froze in place, their hands hovering awkwardly over their instruments. At the VIP table in the front row, Colonel Diane Washington leaned forward, her sharp eyes narrowing with intense, calculated interest. She knew exactly what it meant for a commanding officer to make a public declaration like that. I turned back to look at my father. His smug, victorious grin had completely vanished. For a split second, the color drained entirely from his face, leaving him a sickly pale white. But as the public humiliation registered in his arrogant brain, a dark, violent shade of purple rushed into his cheeks. The veins in his neck bulged against his expensive silk collar. His illusion of wealth and power was evaporating in front of his most important business associates. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed. He stepped aggressively toward me, dropping the facade of the loving father. "Give me that microphone right now." He lunged forward, reaching out with both hands to snatch the audio equipment away from me. He intended to physically muscle me out of the way, take control of the narrative, and play my announcement off as a psychotic break or a bad joke. He thought he could bully me into submission just like he had done for my entire life. But he never even got close. Before his fingers could graze the metal handle of the microphone, a tall figure in a black tuxedo materialized between us. Jason Carter moved with the terrifying fluid speed of a trained soldier entering a combat engagement. He planted his feet firmly on the wooden stage, squaring his broad shoulders and creating an impenetrable physical barrier between my father and me. "Back away from the major," Jason commanded. He did not yell, but his voice was hard as granite and carried a lethal authority. He raised one hand, pressing it flat against the center of my father's chest, stopping his forward momentum completely. "You are interfering with an active federal officer. Step back right now." My father stumbled backward, his polished leather shoes slipping slightly on the slick wooden surface of the stage. He looked at Jason in absolute shock, his brain failing to comprehend that he was no longer the alpha male in the room. He glared at me, his chest heaving with exertion and fury. "You insane, ungrateful brat," my father spat, his voice trembling with uncontrollable rage. You are going to ruin my company over a petty grudge. I will call General Davies tonight and have you court-martialed for this. I warned you what would happen if you pushed me. I did not flinch. I simply smiled. It was the cold, predatory smile of a woman who held all the cards. You cannot call anyone at the Pentagon, Richard, I replied, my voice booming through the speakers for every single guest to hear. Because I already submitted my report to the federal database this morning. And the Department of Defense does not look kindly on civilian contractors who attempt to extort military personnel to secure fraudulent bids. Down at the sweetheart table, Natalie jumped to her feet. Her chair scraped loudly against the polished dance floor. She pointed a shaking finger at me, completely abandoning her sweet, elegant bride persona. "You are lying," Natalie screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You are just jealous and pathetic. Derek, do something. Tell them she is lying. Throw her out of here." She looked down at her new husband, expecting him to rush the stage and defend her honor like a loyal dog. She expected him to use his wealth and status to silence me. But Derek did not move a single muscle to help her. He remained seated at the table. He slowly picked up his crystal water glass and took a calm, measured sip. When he lowered the glass, he looked up at his new wife with an expression of absolute freezing disgust. He did not say a word, letting her hang herself with her own panic. I gripped the microphone tighter, turning my attention back to the crowd. "Denying your bid is just administrative protocol," I announced, ensuring my voice remained steady and clinical. "That alone will just bankrupt your failing company. But we are not just talking about a lost contract tonight. Are we, Richard? We are talking about how you actually paid for this wedding." I reached into my small, structured clutch, my fingers bypassing my phone and grabbing the thick blue envelope I had secured from Bradley at the bank. I unclasped the heavy wax seal and pulled out a stack of heavily stamped papers. The bright overhead spotlight reflected off the glossy surface of the certified documents. I held them up for the entire room to see. Furthermore, I announced, projecting my voice so it echoed off the high vaulted ceilings, "Your scheme of forging a United States Army officer's signature to secure fraudulent loans is officially over." My father suddenly stopped struggling against Jason. His body went entirely rigid. His eyes locked onto the blue envelope in my hand, and the last remnants of his arrogant bravado shattered into a million pieces. He recognized the bank logo printed across the top margin. He knew exactly what I was holding. "You did not pay for this wedding, Richard." I continued pacing slowly across the front of the stage. "You stole $250,000 in equity from my fully paid-off home while I was deployed in a combat zone. You paid off a corrupt local notary. You committed federal wire fraud. And you used that stolen money to buy Natalie a $90,000 Porsche and to pad your failing corporate bank accounts." Loud gasps erupted from the VIP tables. People were violently shifting in their elegant chairs. My mother, Patricia, jumped up from the front row, her face twisted in panic. She pointed a shaking finger at me, screaming that I was a jealous liar trying to ruin her perfect night. "Words are incredibly easy to deny, Patricia," I said smoothly, cutting her off completely. "So let us look at the hard evidence." I looked toward the back of the massive ballroom, right at the elevated sound booth. The young audio-visual technician gave me a quick, subtle thumbs up. I had visited him an hour before the reception began, handing him an encrypted flash drive and a crisp $100 bill with very specific instructions to override the wedding planner's approved presentation. The massive digital screens flanking the stage, which had previously been displaying romantic, sunlit engagement photos of Derek and Natalie, suddenly went completely black. A fraction of a second later, they illuminated with high-definition, larger-than-life scans of the certified bank documents. The first slide was the forged power of attorney. The sloppy, looping signature was magnified to 10 feet tall. Right beside it, I had placed a scanned copy of my actual military identification card, showing my sharp, angular signature for direct comparison. The forgery was glaringly obvious even to an untrained eye. The crowd erupted into chaotic whispers. The wealthy businessmen who had just been clapping for Richard were now pointing at the glowing screens in sheer horror. The slide changed automatically. Now the screens displayed the bank transfer receipts. Massive red circles highlighted the exact sums and the destination accounts. $90,000 wired directly to the luxury auto dealership. $50,000 transferred to the premium bridal caterer who had just served them dinner. Look very closely at the dates on those transfers, I instructed the crowd, keeping my tone surgical. He drained my equity accounts 2 months ago. But wait. Derek, did you not just pay the florist and the final venue balance this morning? I turned to look directly at the sweetheart table. Derek stood up. The entire ballroom fell dead silent as the wealthy, highly respected surgeon took the floor. I did, Derek said. His voice carried clearly across the silent room without needing a microphone. Natalie told me her father was just having a temporary liquidity issue. She asked me to use my travel credit cards to float the costs. I paid over $120,000 in vendor fees this month alone. The massive screens shifted one final time, showing a side-by-side comparison of my father's hidden black ledger and Derek's locked credit card statements. The mathematical reality was undeniable. My father had kept my stolen house equity to save his failing business and buy the Porsche, and he had manipulated Derek into footing the bill for the actual wedding. "You are a thief, Richard," I stated, my voice ringing out like a judge reading a final verdict. "You built this entire beautiful night on stolen money and desperate lies. You thought you could extort me into silence by threatening to destroy my military career? You thought I was weak, but you forgot one crucial detail." I walked to the very edge of the stage, looking down at the man who had tormented me for my entire life. He was hyperventilating, his hands shaking violently as his friends and investors looked at him with absolute disgust. "I am not the scared little girl you raised," I said coldly. "I am a combat veteran. And when someone attacks my home and my livelihood, I do not cry. I completely dismantle the threat." The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable, projected in glowing digital ink for the entire room to see. The silence was absolute save for the ragged, panicked breathing of my father. Then the silence was shattered by a piercing shriek from the sweetheart table. Natalie was standing, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She snatched her carefully arranged bridal bouquet from the table, gripping the stem so hard her knuckles turned white. With a guttural scream, she launched the heavy bundle of imported white roses and orchids directly at me. It sailed across the distance between us, scattering petals in its wake, and hit the wooden stage floor near my feet with a dull thud. "Derek, do something!" Natalie shrieked, her voice echoing wildly off the high ceilings. Her eyes were wide with panic, darting between the damning financial documents on the screen and her new husband. "Kick her out! She is lying. She is just trying to ruin my perfect day. Make her leave right now." She reached out, grabbing Derek by the sleeve of his custom tuxedo, trying to physically pull him to her side to defend her. She expected him to play the role he had played all year, the wealthy, accommodating fiancé who would smooth over any conflict to keep her happy. Derek did not budge. He stood up slowly, deliberately peeling her frantic fingers off his sleeve. He did not look angry. He looked entirely detached, like a scientist, observing a particularly repulsive specimen under a microscope. He stepped away from the sweetheart table and walked calmly toward the stage. The crowd parted for him in absolute silence. He stopped right at the edge of the polished wooden platform, looking up at me, and then slowly turned his gaze down to his new wife, who was now trembling with a mixture of rage and sudden terrifying uncertainty. "She does not need to leave," Derek said. His voice was perfectly level, carrying an icy calm that sent a chill through the room. "But you do." Natalie recoiled as if he had slapped her. "What?" she gasped, her hands flying to her chest. "Derek, what are you saying? I am your wife. We just got married. You cannot take her side. She is insane." Derek let out a short, hollow laugh that held absolutely no humor. "You are my wife," he agreed, his tone surgical. "For now. That is exactly why I went through with the ceremony today, Natalie. Because if I had canceled this morning, your father would have filed for bankruptcy, and I would be stuck paying for this entire fraudulent spectacle out of pocket. The color vanished from Natalie's face. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked at Derek as if she were seeing a stranger. The realization that she had been outplayed, that the man she thought she was manipulating had actually trapped her, began to settle heavily over her. "You think I did not know?" Derek continued, stepping closer to her, his voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper that still carried to the front rows. "I saw the credit card statements, Natalie. I saw the frozen accounts. I sat in a coffee shop and read the certified bank documents proving that your father stole $250,000 from Rebecca to fund your lifestyle." He pointed at the massive digital screens behind me, still displaying the matching dates between the stolen equity and the vendor payments. "I know exactly who paid for the caterer," Derek stated coldly. "I know exactly who paid for that $30,000 dress you are wearing. You looked me in the eyes and cried, swearing that your sister hacked the accounts. You lied to my face without a single ounce of hesitation or guilt. You let my parents sit here today believing they were witnessing an honorable union, when in reality they were just watching a thief secure her final payout." Natalie's legs seemed to give out. She stumbled backward, bumping into the sweetheart table, her hands gripping the edge for support. "Derek, no, please," she stammered, the hysteria finally breaking through her perfectly curated facade. "You do not understand. My father told me he was handling the finances. I did not know he forged her signature. I swear I did not know." "Do not insult my intelligence," Derek snapped, his voice finally cracking like a whip. "You knew exactly where the money was coming from. You mocked her all year while driving a car bought with her stolen equity. You are a grifter, Natalie. You and your father thought you were the smartest people in the room, playing everyone else for fools." He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a sleek silver pen. He held it up for her to see, a final definitive symbol of the contract she had just signed. "The performance is over," Derek said, turning his back on her entirely. Derek lowered the silver pen, tapping it rhythmically against his thigh. He looked at Natalie's horrified expression, watching the realization dawn on her that he had completely outmaneuvered her. "The first-class flights to Bora Bora are cancelled," Derek stated, his voice completely devoid of the warmth she was so used to exploiting. "The luxury resort reservations are cancelled. And every single credit card you have with my name on it was locked the second we walked away from the altar." Natalie gasped, her hands trembling as she grabbed the edge of the sweetheart table. She tried to formulate a defense, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, but Derek did not let her speak. "But that is just the beginning." Derek continued, stepping closer so she could hear every single syllable clearly. "You thought you were so clever. You thought getting that marriage license signed today secured your future. You thought it meant I would just quietly absorb your father's debts to avoid a public scandal. But you severely underestimated my understanding of family law." He gestured toward the massive digital screens, still displaying the fraudulent bank transfers and my forged signature. "Because we are now legally married in this state, our assets are financially linked," Derek explained, his tone surgical and precise. "Which means I do not have to wait months for a civil fraud trial to get my money back." My lawyer was standing by at the courthouse. The moment the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, he filed an emergency family court injunction. Natalie shook her head frantically, her perfectly curled hair falling out of place. "No, you cannot do that. I am your wife. We are supposed to be a team." "You are my debtor," Derek corrected her sharply. "And the emergency injunction grants me immediate authority to seize marital assets acquired through fraudulent funds, starting with that brand new $90,000 Porsche parked outside. The tow truck is already in the country club parking lot, Natalie. The keys are being handed over to the repo agent right now." A loud, guttural wail escaped Natalie's throat. That sports car was her ultimate status symbol, the physical proof of her manufactured superiority. It was the chariot she used to flaunt her wealth around our affluent suburb. "You cannot take my car!" she screamed, tears finally spilling over and ruining her flawless bridal makeup. "Daddy bought me that car. It is mine. Your father stole $250,000 from your sister to buy you that car." Derek fired back, his voice booming across the silent ballroom. "And then you stole over $120,000 from me to pay for this absurd party. You wanted a fairy tale wedding, Natalie? Well, you got it. But the fairy tale is over. Enjoy that $30,000 custom dress you are wearing, because when the annulment goes through on Monday morning, you will be personally and legally responsible for paying off every single cent of the debt." Natalie collapsed back into her ornate chair, burying her face in her hands. The golden child, the untouchable princess of the Lawson family, was completely broken, sobbing hysterically into the imported silk tablecloth. The reality of her situation was finally settling in. She had no car. She had no husband. Her father was bankrupt. And she was about to be buried under a mountain of legal fees and devastating debt. She had traded her integrity for temporary luxury, and the massive bill had just come due. Suddenly, Patricia scrambled forward from the front row. Her heavy silver gown caught on the chairs as she pushed her way toward the sweetheart table. She reached out toward Derek, her face a mask of desperate pleading. "Derek, please," my mother begged, her voice trembling. "You are overreacting. We can fix this quietly. Richard will pay you back, I promise. Do not ruin our family over a simple misunderstanding. Think of the scandal." Derek looked at Patricia with the exact same cold disgust he had just shown her daughter. "There is no misunderstanding," Patricia, Derek said firmly. "Your husband is a federal criminal. Your daughter is a thief. And you enabled every single second of it while treating your other daughter like garbage. You sacrificed her safety and her sanity just to keep up appearances. There is nothing left to fix quietly." Patricia let out a pathetic sob, looking around the massive ballroom for any sympathetic faces. She found absolutely none. The wealthy guests she had desperately tried to impress for decades were staring at her with unabashed judgment and horror. The high society standing she had sold her soul to maintain was gone forever. She would be a total pariah in their circles by tomorrow morning. Derek straightened his suit jacket. He looked down at Natalie one last time. "I will see you in court," he said softly. Derek turned his attention to my father, who was still standing near the stage, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his defeat. Richard had banked his entire existence on Derek's money and reputation, saving his failing business. Now Derek was the one actively dismantling it. "You are done, Richard," Derek said, his voice dripping with utter contempt. "My family does not associate with criminals. My father spent 30 years serving this country with honor, and you thought you could use his name to legitimize your pathetic failing con game. You are going to lose everything." Derek turned back to me, standing tall on the stage with the blue folder still in my hand. He gave me a single respectful nod. The secret alliance had served its purpose perfectly. The financial execution was complete. Now it was time for the federal authorities to handle the rest. Derek stepped down from the stage and walked directly toward his parents' table. Colonel Diane Washington did not wait for him to arrive. She pushed her heavy dining chair back, the wooden legs scraping sharply against the polished floor. She stood up to her full height. For the entire evening, she had played the role of the polite, accommodating guest. Now the retired Marine Corps colonel took absolute command of her family. She looked at my father, who was sweating profusely on the dance floor, and then looked at Natalie, who was sobbing uncontrollably at the sweetheart table. Diane did not say a single word to either of them. They were not worth her breath. She simply turned her head and gave her husband a sharp, definitive nod. The reaction was instantaneous. The entire Washington family stood up in absolute terrifying unison. Dozens of aunts, uncles, and cousins rose from their seats as one collective unit. They did not whisper. They did not scramble. They moved with the silent, dignified precision of a military drill. Derek joined his mother at the head of the formation. Without a backward glance, the groom and his entire family turned their backs on the Lawson family and marched straight toward the exit. The synchronized departure of half the ballroom was a stunning visual blow. It sucked the remaining energy right out of the room. The wealthy business associates and socialites, who had just been cheering for my father, now sat in horrified silence watching the groom walk out of his own wedding reception. The sheer magnitude of the social destruction was unprecedented. My father tried to speak. He raised his hand, stepping toward the center of the dance floor. "Wait!" he croaked, his voice cracking violently. "Please, nobody leave. This is all a massive misunderstanding. We can clear this up right now. Let me just explain the financial restructuring." But his pathetic attempt at damage control was cut completely short. Just as the Washington family cleared the threshold, the heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open again. They did not just open. They were pushed wide open with explosive, undeniable force. Two federal agents from the Army Criminal Investigation Division walked into the room. They wore dark tactical windbreakers with stark yellow lettering across the back. Right behind them were four local uniformed police officers, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. The string quartet, which had been frozen in terror, actually dropped a violin bow. It clattered loudly against the wooden floor. Jason Carter stepped down from the stage and walked directly toward the federal agents. He pulled his military identification from his tuxedo pocket, flashing it to the lead investigator. The agent gave Jason a sharp nod, then turned his hardened gaze toward the center of the room. Richard Lawson, the lead CID agent, called out, his voice echoing through the silent, massive ballroom. My father froze. He looked at the federal agents, then looked wildly at the local police, blocking the exit. The reality of his situation finally pierced his massive ego. He was not going to talk his way out of this. He was not going to hire a corporate lawyer to tie it up in civil court. He had defrauded a federal military officer, and the federal government had come to collect. "I am Richard Lawson," he stammered, raising his trembling hands in a gesture of surrender. "But I have not done anything wrong. It was a family loan. I had authorization." The lead agent did not even entertain the lie. He walked straight onto the polished wooden dance floor, flanked by the local police. He reached to the back of his belt and pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "Richard Lawson, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and multiple violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act," the agent stated loudly, grabbing my father by the right arm and twisting it sharply behind his back. My father let out a pathetic yelp. He did not fight back. The man who had terrorized me for my entire life, who had threatened to destroy my career and mocked me in front of hundreds of people, completely folded. The loud metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed across the silent room. It was the best sound I had ever heard. Patricia, who had been standing near the sweetheart table, watched the steel cuffs lock around her husband's wrists. Her entire world, built entirely on false wealth and social climbing, disintegrated in real time. She let out a dramatic theatrical gasp, throwing her hand over her forehead in a classic swoon. She expected the wealthy guests nearby to rush forward and catch her. She expected sympathy. But the guests, terrified of being associated with a federal criminal, physically recoiled. They took large steps backward. Patricia fainted. She dropped like a stone, hitting the polished hardwood floor of the dance floor with a loud, entirely undignified thud. Not a single person moved to help her. I stood on the stage watching my father, being walk through the lavish floral arches in handcuffs, while my sister sobbed alone and my mother lay unconscious on the floor. 6 months have passed since the night my family's fragile house of cards completely collapsed under the weight of their own greed. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely merciless. When you build your entire life on a foundation of lies, the collapse leaves absolutely nothing behind to salvage. My father did not get the high-priced corporate defense he always arrogantly assumed would save him. Because I had successfully frozen his stolen funds, and because his contracting business instantly folded without the military bid, he was forced to rely on a court-appointed public defender. The federal judge presiding over his case was a former Navy officer. He had absolutely zero sympathy for a civilian who exploited military financial protections and stole from his own daughter deployed in a combat zone. Richard Lawson was sentenced to 5 years in a federal penitentiary. The man who obsessed over custom silk suits, country club memberships, and boasting to wealthy investors is now wearing a standard-issue uniform and eating cafeteria food. Natalie received an equally brutal reality check. Derek was true to his word. He did not hesitate, and he did not show an ounce of mercy. His legal team finalized the annulment within a matter of weeks. The family court judge took one look at the certified bank records proving her complicity in the fraud and brought the hammer down. The $90,000 Porsche was repossessed the morning after the wedding. Because they had technically been married, the court held her personally liable for the massive vendor debts she had authorized. Without her father's stolen slush fund to bail her out, Natalie was forced into the harsh reality of the working class she used to openly mock. The former golden child, who used to throw tantrums over imported flowers, is now working 50 hours a week as a barista in a neighboring town. She spends her days getting yelled at by impatient customers and scrubbing espresso machines just to make her minimum monthly debt payments. As for my mother, Patricia, she moved into a tiny, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. She was completely and permanently exiled from the high society circles she had worshipped her entire life. None of her wealthy friends returned her calls after watching her husband get escorted off a dance floor in handcuffs. She ended up exactly where she always feared she would be, completely alone and entirely irrelevant. Meanwhile, my life moved in the exact opposite direction. The military conducted a thorough investigation into the fraud, completely cleared my name, and helped me navigate the legal channels to restore my credit. The forged secondary mortgage was officially voided by the federal courts. The title to my home is completely clean and entirely mine again. But that was not the only victory. 2 months ago, I stood at rigid attention in my dress blue uniform, while the base commander proudly pinned the silver oak leaf onto my shoulders. I was officially promoted to the rank of lieutenant colonel. Today, I am not wearing a restrictive uniform or a hideous neon green taffeta dress. I am wearing comfortable jeans and a simple t-shirt, walking through the glass doors of my beautiful, legally restored home. The afternoon sun is shining brightly, and my backyard is filled with the smell of charcoal smoke and the sound of genuine, unfiltered laughter. I am hosting a weekend barbecue, and the yard is packed with the people who actually matter. Jason is standing by the grill using a pair of metal tongs to expertly flip steaks while joking loudly with a group of officers from my logistics command. Sitting at the patio table holding a cold beer and smiling easily is Derek. We did not become a romantic couple, but the absolute fire we walked through together forged a profound, lifelong friendship. He is a good man, his finances are secure, and he finally has the peace he deserves. I stand on my back porch holding a glass of iced tea and look out over the crowd. There is no performative cruelty here. There is no walking on eggshells, no passive-aggressive insults, and no one trying to shrink me down to make themselves feel bigger. Everyone in this yard respects me, supports me, and has my back in the darkest of trenches. For the first 34 years of my life, I desperately chased the approval of people who only saw me as a target. I thought family was defined by blood, by shared DNA, and by the obligation to endure their toxicity. But looking at the laughing, loyal faces of the people I chose to let into my life, I finally understand the truth. Blood does not make a family. Loyalty, respect, and unconditional support make a family. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace, please hit the like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments how you found the strength to build your own chosen family. Remember, you never have to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. Stand your ground, know your worth, and never let anyone forge your signature on the life you built. The story of Rebecca and her family's betrayal serves as a powerful reminder that blood relations do not automatically guarantee love, respect, or safety. For years, Rebecca endured emotional abuse and financial exploitation, simply because the perpetrators shared her DNA. Society often pushes the narrative that family is everything, pressuring individuals to forgive toxic behavior and endure endless mistreatment in the name of unconditional familial loyalty. However, the profound lesson embedded in this narrative is that true family is forged through mutual respect, unwavering support, and genuine loyalty, not just biological ties. Richard and Natalie weaponized their titles as father and sister to manipulate, steal, and humiliate. They treated empathy as a weakness and used familial obligation as a blank check for abuse. Rebecca's journey to dismantle their deceit is not just a tale of sweet revenge, it is a masterclass in establishing ironclad boundaries. She teaches us that walking away from toxic relatives is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary and brave act of self-preservation. We are never obligated to set ourselves on fire to keep our abusers warm, even if we share a last name. The moment she stood in her backyard, surrounded by the people who truly valued her, her chosen military family, and Derek, she embodied the ultimate victory. She proved that we have the power to curate our own circles and redefine what family means on our own terms. Healing begins when we stop seeking validation from those committed to breaking us down and start investing in the people who actively protect our peace. If you are currently sacrificing your own mental or financial well-being to keep toxic relatives happy, take a step back today and draw the boundary you need to reclaim your life.